Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to give people a couple of more minutes to join, and then we'll kick things off, so hang tight. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on extending cybersecurity beyond the traditional office perimeter, which is a huge topic of discussion today as folks truly settle into the reality of what has become a remote operation and remote work norm. So I'm Dr. Christine Izuakor, and I'm the moderator for the conversation today. A little bit of background on me: I've worked in the cybersecurity industry for over a decade now, leading a variety of cybersecurity functions at large organizations like United Airlines before taking on my current role as the founder and CEO of Cyber Pop-Up, which is an on-demand cybersecurity service platform. I also earned a PhD in security engineering and MCISSP certified. We also have Pete Nourse with us for this discussion today. Pete is the Chief Marketing Officer at Veriato, a super experienced industry leader in the technology marketing space and has over 20 years of experience focusing on the cybersecurity realm. So Pete, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Christine.
Awesome. So now at this point, everyone's office perimeter has extended beyond what would typically be considered your normal, four walls of a, corporate real estate space. And so the modern office, setting encompasses pretty much every nook, corner, and the crevice of the world. And so for today's agenda, we're going to dig into this more, and we'll start out with some of the latest trends that we're seeing in the evolution of the office perimeter. We'll talk about the latest threats that organizations are facing sort of in and out of the office. And then next, we'll talk through some best practices for keeping your data and systems safe while they sit in your employee's house, essentially, or wherever it may be. And finally, we'll introduce a user-centric approach to extending cybersecurity beyond that traditional office perimeter. We have time for questions at the end, of course. However, feel free to submit questions throughout the session in the Q&A window, and I'll keep an eye out for those, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can throughout. So jumping into some of the trends now. I want to start with, a few stats that I think truly set context to the risks and this threat landscape. So 25% of employees admit that they're sharing their passwords with their family and their friends. And so this is, quite concerning, I'm sure, for many people. But also another report showed that 50% of employees share their company issued devices with their friends and family as well. And so the concerns around what employees are doing at home are super valid right now. And the idea that employees at home tend to introduce more cyber risks due to more lax security behavior when they're not necessarily in the office, not necessarily around their colleagues and such, that cannot be ignored right now. Another one is that almost 30% of employees don't lock their phones. So think as employees get more comfortable with working remotely in shared working spaces, at the park, in a cafe, where they decide to, leave their device out and run to the bathroom or run to grab coffee at the counter. Like all it takes is that split second, right, for someone to take a device. And if there's sensitive, data or access on that device, then guess what? That can be considered a breach, right? And in some cases can lead to all kinds of disclosure requirements and so on. And so some of these things that seem so minor when you have your workforce, out and about, become a much bigger deal and a much bigger concern. And of course, these aren't just my opinions either. 72% of security professionals are concerned that remote employees tend to break security policies and expose systems to risk. So we have to focus on, doing something to address these growing risks and trends when it comes to working beyond the traditional office. And so to kick things off, the first question, I want to set context kind of and ensure we're all on the same page. Pete, can you start off by maybe explaining what is meant by the new office perimeter and how has that concept evolved over time from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. We've been dealing with hundreds of companies worldwide as they've been kind of moving through this ongoing, changing world that we're living with, starting, last February, and with the pandemic changing everybody's world, and we've seen a number of shifts over that time, and we're, according to the surveys that I've seen recently, that shift is going to continue and it's never going to go back to the way it was. Only about 20% of employees are planning on coming back to the office full time when they can. In the latest survey that I just read, the majority of people are planning on working from home some days and working from the office other days. And then there's another about 25% that are going to be completely remote. And that's kind of where the view of the world in terms of the old office where everybody comes is really is going to be a thing of the past. As a matter of fact, Salesforce just put out a statement saying that the 9-to-5 office is dead. So the world has definitely changed. And back to your point about while people are at home and the new levels of danger, one of the scary stats that I had seen was that 52% of people, this is an IBM security survey, said that they are using their personal PC. So they're not even using an office, provided PC. And when you're talking about the important information and data for a company, that can be pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've talked about, some of the threats a little bit already here that you've started to bring up, but to expand on that. So, for example, like I was reading another report where like remote desktop protocol and like SSH exposures and things like that have grown by almost 50%, right, over the last year, targeting some of those remote technologies, and things like that are working, right? Another interesting stat was that 20% of companies experienced a breach as a direct result of remote work last year, according to one remote work cybersecurity report. And so we know that attackers continue to take advantage of this environment, right? And so to expand on that, what new threats are you all seeing arise along with this continual shift?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple areas of concern. One are insider threats, and that's traditionally where we've played for the last 15 years, working with banks, governments, large industry, people that are concerned with protecting PII, intellectual property, financials, and so forth. The insider threat risk generally is driven from a point of stress. Not always, but generally. It's someone who ends up in a bad financial situation, who has disengaged from a company, feels like they've been wronged for one reason or another, and they've mentally separated from a company. These are all things that lead up to them making the wrong decision and stealing information. And so we've seen that over the years. Now you take that concept and all of a sudden you throw a pandemic, and those two things are just so driven to a much higher level that it's putting that insider threat risk at very very high level. Number one, stressors, right? I mean, has there ever been a year like this, at least that we've experienced, maybe back in World War II, but since then, I don't think there's ever been a year that anyone has had this level of stress in their life, whether it's medical, financial, and it could be a spouse and the other person's still working for a company, but their spouse has lost a job. New stressors are being introduced all the time and within this new work world. The other thing is opportunity. People are not under constant, they're not constantly monitored. They are doing their own thing for the first time maybe in their lives. They don't have a boss looking over their shoulder. They have access still to all this data. It could be, for fraud. It could be for grabbing information and selling it. They have all this time and there's no one really watching. And whereas before they were tied into a corporate network, now they can be tied into a corporate network, but they don't necessarily have to be, right? They can switch off that VPN. They can turn off their Wi-Fi. There's a number of ways they can do it. It's not the same as when an accounting system is sitting on a desk and it's always there and and that's tied into the corporate accounting database. Now it's going out and people are accessing all of this sensitive information from their homes, from their kitchens, sitting on people's kitchen tables. As a matter of fact, 42% of employees working remotely said that they are accessing either PII or other sensitive data. So it's close to half the workforce that has all of this stuff sitting in spare bedrooms. So it's just a huge change in terms of the security footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be wild to think about all the different areas that data is, I guess, like traveling and being stored at this point in time. There's really no boundaries. Another thing that I think is important to add is also just the trends around ransomware and in this environment. That continues to be an issue, right, that attackers are taking full advantage of. And of course, it's been an issue for some time. But we all know that a key strategy for defending against ransomware is to have backups, right? And when your data is all over the place, right, and on these employee devices, like how do you make sure that you have adequate backups of data and that you're able to like truly recover when you need to, and just thinking about like how to more robustly address some of those risks or something that I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, but I feel like it's a huge risk that comes out of this space as well. Now, I'm curious to hear from our attendees as well. We have a quick poll that I'll launch here. What are threats that you guys are most concerned about? I'll try to move this over. We'll give people a couple of minutes to respond. Yeah, it looks like at first glance, most we're leaning heavy towards data loss and compliance. I'll give people just a few more seconds before I close it out and show the results. Okay, share these. So yeah, it looks like we're heavy on the compliance and data loss, especially some insider threat for sure. Ransomware is a big one as well. So we'll definitely I'll hide these results. We'll keep going through the presentation with that in mind. So a big part of this is also, what can we do about it, right? And so when it comes to solutions and shifting gears in that sense, what are some of the key recommendations? I know we have a couple of them listed here, but what are some key recommendations that you have for keeping data and systems secure beyond the traditional office perimeter?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to look at is going beyond the network, right? The network plays a big part, obviously, in corporate security, but where people are not in the building, they're not within the firewall, they have the ability to go on and off the network. You can't look at it just as a network solution that I can figure everything out by looking at network traffic, where files are going, and so forth. So in terms of having a complete view of what's happening with all the data, which is the bottom line, right? That's what everyone is concerned about, is whether it's from an insider threat or from ransomware, it always comes back to the data. So if you're going to have a complete security view of what's happening in the data, you now have to move from a network-centric security posture more to an endpoint security posture into a people-centric security posture. And that's really what we help companies do. It's looking at and analyzing what people are doing and having the true record of exactly what's happening with every individual in a company, because it has huge implications from both security, data protection, and compliance. And we'll get into a little bit, some detail on that in a bit. But it's really kind of looking at things in a different way. And so that's one of the main things that we help most corporations and government agencies do.
Got it. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that a couple of other things to add there are we can't ignore this idea of this user-centric approach. I think is super important, because I feel like when it comes to, like, whether it's data loss or whether it's compliance or whether it's some of those other categories, at the end of the day, like, human beings and people are still at the core of how the risk ends up getting introduced into organizations. And so I think that user-centric approach is super important, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think a big piece to that is also training and awareness for users, right? Like, don't slow up on training and awareness just because people aren't in the office, right, or in your face, right? I'm a huge fan of face-to-face engagement when it comes to user awareness, because that's the best way to make it engaging and fun. But I feel like in this environment, it's important to still continue to focus on that virtual engagement as much as possible. I think another point, I was talking to a cybersecurity network engineer recently who brought up a really valid concern that I don't think a lot of people are thinking as much about or talking as much about, at least in the conversations I've had across the industry. And that's also thinking about what's being left behind in your traditional office. Like, everything we're talking about today is, like, super critical, right? But it's looking at it from a holistic view, right, of what is left in the traditional office. Some people left their offices and haven't been back since last year, right? And so, is access off? Are files still lying around? Can people get into the office, right? When you talk about insider threats and people and not having as many people around to see what's going on, do people still have access to those areas? Are they still protected? And at some point, bottom line is, I think we need to not only focus on how we secure people beyond the office. I think that's the immediate focus right now for sure, but I think it's also, like, thinking about, as we adopt these strategies and as we talk about these protection measures, making sure that we're addressing that truly hybrid element of it, and knowing that, we still have to take care of that on-prem side of things as well. Now, as perimeters get blurred, right, we're all learning that while these perimeters are still important, we have to focus more on nodes, and you alluded to that a little bit earlier on too. And when I say nodes, I mean users, right? And so tell us more about this user-centric approach to extending security beyond the office perimeter, and what your best practices and recommendations are there.
Yeah, there's a couple key pieces to that when you talk about user-centric security. One is that you don't know where a threat is going to be coming from. So looking at it, as you just mentioned, in a holistic way. So if you have 1,000 employees, you don't put antivirus on just 500 employees or 50 employees. You have it on all 1,000 employees. And when we start talking about a user-centric security strategy, we're talking about monitoring, seeing what exactly is happening on every laptop and every PC, every Mac, every Android. what's happening. If they're connecting into the corporate network, they're part of the company. They have access to the goose with the golden egg, and we need to understand and be able to monitor that activity on those. So it's as much about the device and the people that are using it really as it is the data. So you have to look at the where the attack or where the weakness is going to be coming from. And so that's when you start to look at the people, and when I say, when you're looking at it, I'm not saying an individual security person, I'm saying having a tool that can look at the behaviors of the people and understand when something is changing or changing drastically, or pushing off a sign of threat. And that's where user behavior analytics come in. So the key with behavior analytics is what it does is it baselines on everybody in the organization. And it's constantly comparing their normal activity to what they're doing right now. If they see something that goes way out of bounds, well, it's gonna send off a flag. It's gonna let people know that, hey, there's something unusual happening here. May not be bad, but it's certainly unusual. There are other things that it will send off, and we'll know, yes, this is bad, or this is a very high risk item. The second piece of it is how well can you see once a alert goes off, how quickly can you discern what's happening so that you can take action? And especially if this person is in another city, state, country, how do you understand exactly what's going on there? And so having the monitoring and recording of what's on there for the ability to go back and see the logs, even see screenshot evidence of what exactly is happening is crucial for a security team. So when alerts go off, they can see what's happening that caused the situation. So there's kind of two pieces to the puzzle. One is the behavior analytics, comparing a person to their normal behavior and even behaviors of other people within their group. And then the second step is, okay, when something is flagged, how do I go back in and figure out what's really happening, and is this a real security issue? So I think those are two of the big things that we work with a lot of the companies on, that we work with.
Yeah, I agree. That's super important. And at this point, I think that's a really good segue into maybe showing some of the capabilities that you all have and doing a quick kind of a demo on what some of this looks like in practice. So I'm going to hand control over to you.
Okay.
A second, and we can get into that second half. Where are we?
Okay, and okay. Hopefully I can see my screen now.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. If we were talking, a year ago, before the pandemic, we really would have been talking just about insider threats with most of the people on this call. But since the pandemic, the areas that we've worked with companies has really expanded. Everyone realizes that the world is never going to go back to the way it is, and so they're really looking at something, that we've termed workforce transformation, and what are the tools that we need to effectively manage workforce transformation. And it's more than just data loss, it's more than insider threat. That is one of the pieces of the puzzle. But the other parts that we working very actively with companies with are productivity and engagement. What's happening? What are people doing when they're out there? And the third area is compliance. And on the poll, most of you indicated that compliance was a big issue. So these are the three areas that we work with people and help setting up this new workforce transformation. And one of the things that in the IBM's security service they found was that 61% of the people that were surveyed, they had not been provided any new tools to secure their solution, their desktop that's sitting, on their kitchen table. So the proactive companies that we're working with are looking at that. What are the tools that can help us move forward in this new world? And that's where we will give you an introduction to Cerebral. So Cerebral is our mid-size and enterprise product. We also do have another version of our monitoring solution, which is called Vision. It's for smaller businesses. It's cloud-based. But I'll give you a quick overview of Cerebral, and we'll touch on those three areas. data security with insider threat, compliance, and productivity. So at the heart of Cerebral, it's a single integrated platform. It encapsulates user and entity behavior analytics, user activity monitoring, and predictive risk scoring. And at the core of it, it's an AI-powered threat hunting machine. But as we talked about, it's more than just data threat, and the world has expanded, and there's a lot of other areas that we need to be concerned with now. The way Cerebral's set up real simply is there's a micro agent that would go on every endpoint, and it starts constantly monitoring and analyzing everything that's going on every endpoint. That information is then fed back to the Cerebral management console, stored in the SQL Server, and it works in both physical and virtualized environments. So it's a pretty simple setup, and it can be deployed obviously if someone's in the office or in a remote location. So I would say that, boy, 90% of the companies that are calling us in the last year, this is one of the main concerns they have. And primarily, we had been working generally with the office of the CISO with corporations before the pandemic hit. Once the pandemic hit and everyone went home, we started to work with the office of the CIO, VPs of IT, HR, general managers, business owners. They needed to be able to understand what was happening with their workforce because they literally could not see them anymore. So what Cerebral lets you do, once all that information is gathered from the endpoint, it lets you track and analyze and record everything that everyone is doing at home or in the office. And then it's very simple to pull a daily productivity report and see if, Joe is working hard on Excel spreadsheets all day like he's supposed to, or if he took the afternoon off and decided he was going to watch, Game of Thrones reruns. It provides very fine-grained control over who and what is monitored. So it's the privacy question. You can say exactly who's going to be monitored and what you're going to monitor. So it may be it's only you want to be monitoring the application, so you can see if people are using Outlook and Excel and PowerPoint and accounting applications, and you want to know what part of their day are they doing that. So it doesn't have to be that you're watching everything that a person's doing. You really have control over exactly who and what you'd be monitoring. And we even go as far as we have built into our AI psycholinguistics, which is sentiment analysis. So this is where you start to get signals that someone is disengaging from the company. That's important on two fronts. One, it may be that they have a lot of stressors at home. They may be deciding that they are about to leave the company, so they're disengaging. They may be deciding that they need to take that chance and steal some valuable data because they're in such deep financial straits. Sentiment analysis, the psycholinguistic analysis, is the kind of, it analyzes the writing styles that people use within their emails, and it notices changes in those and when people are disengaging, when their writing styles are changing. So it's kind of a it's a foreshadowing of situations, and it's a good way to get ahead of problems. And that's the whole idea. We want to be hunting problems as opposed to just reacting. And here's a simple graph that shows you what you can do within an organization. This is just active and idle time summary. So you can see the people in the accounting department, looks like everybody's mostly signing in. The light blue is when people are signed in and they're active. And the dark blue is when they're logged in, but they're inactive. So most everybody here is logged in around 9 o'clock, and they were pretty active through most of the day. However, I'm going to go down here to Sam. I noticed he logged in at about 8 a.m., turned his computer on, logged in, probably checked some emails, and my guess, and then he did not touch his computer and didn't even log off at the end of the day. So I'm guessing he had a tea time at 9 o'clock and never even made it back for the end of the day. So I guess he's at the 19th hole. So just at a quick glance, you can see what's going on. Now, the productivity reporting gets much deeper. You can be looking at what applications people are using, go into detail of exactly what everybody's doing on any given day or time, and get as much detail as you want. But I just wanted to give you a high level overview that you can quickly check and understand what's going on with the employees in the company. The other big thing that we started to hear, this really came about, I would say, last spring and summer. After they got everyone home, they got their laptops, they got the VPN set up, everything, people were out, and then all of a sudden we got a lot of kind of panicked calls about compliance. And this was the situation that people were describing to us. take this as a hospital, and they have all of their people now working at home. So if you're an insurance claims manager at the hospital, every morning at your home, you're going to click onto your VPN. You're going to download all the patient records from everyone that was discharged yesterday and start working on it for the day. However, at lunchtime, if that person clicks off the VPN, well, all of a sudden, the company is in violation of HIPAA requirements. They have no idea what that person's doing with the 1,000 patient documents they're sitting on their kitchen table in the laptop. They could be going on, they could be uploading them all to the cloud. They could be going to the dark web. You have no idea. And so we're able to help companies with this with a pretty simple solution. Remember, we have the micro agent that is on the desktop. And even though we can use VPN for communication back to HQ and in the database, we don't need to. We can also set up private URLs that will communicate anytime the person is online. So just because they click off VPN does not mean that if Veriato Cerebral is on the desktop, we're still communicating back. And if they decide to unplug the VPN, if they unplug their Wi-Fi in their house, they totally go offline. That's okay too, because remember that Cerebral is always working in the background. So even if they did that and they were going to unload everything onto, say, a USB stick, and then they're going to do something with it later on another computer, you have those records. You will see that as soon as that person goes back online the next day or that afternoon after they've done whatever they were trying to do in stealth, you are going to have all of those details. So from a compliance standpoint, having complete visibility all the time to every single piece of data and what happened with it is critical. And then we're working with a lot of insider threat security folks. This is about data theft, loss of data, and how do we approach that? Unfortunately, we're working with these companies and people test it out and they put it in there. They end up finding a lot of things that they are shocked to find out. We would like to trust everyone, but I think Christine mentioned it earlier on. It's kind of the zero trust policy, right? That you need to have all the information. You can't just assume that all the data is safe. You have to be able to monitor and have that information and be looking for problems, or else you're really setting yourself up. And obviously, we've been talking this whole webinar about the massively expanded risk footprint. And Christine had mentioned earlier a stat about incidents have gone up, and one of the surveys that we were looking at, incidents have gone up by about 23% during the pandemic. So there are more data breaches happening with people out in their when the data is out in the field and at people's houses. The way we look at managing a corporate risk timeline has a couple different factors. First of all, we have the valuable data, and we have the people that are interacting with it, the employees, contractors, ex-employees, even imposters. And then we have the time and the risk as the two axes. And there's really three phases when you're looking at a data breach: pre-breach, the moment of the breach, and then post-breach. And as time goes along, your risk goes up exponentially. Starts here when someone's starting to think about doing something bad, and then all the way to the point of the breach, and then how long is it before the breach is identified and it's stopped. On average in the US, I believe it's around 256 days right now, which is pretty scary. So how quickly can you identify it and take action? And that's what we like to, that's what our Cerebral system is about. And one of the keys is predictive threat hunting. Ideally, we would like to have every breach stopped before it actually happens. There's a lot of signals that go on before someone steals data. It's just like a bank robber, right? They don't just decide 1 minute, hey, I'm going to walk in that bank and take all the money. No, they case the joint ahead of time. They have a getaway car. They've checked out the cameras. They've gone in there, maybe made withdrawals, seen how things are happening. Same thing with corporate data breach. There's a lot of activity that generally goes on before someone steals something. And if we're able to identify that, that's the perfect way. We never want to get to that moment of breach. However, there is no perfect system. But when it happens, you need real-time alerting, and then you need the ability to have the intelligence so you understand exactly what's going on, and that gives you the ability to react. When we say we're watching and analyzing everything on the endpoint, we really are. It's the file transfers, document tracking, network usage, app usage, printer, USB, email, chats, keystrokes, everything. And like I said, you can choose which pieces you're going to be recording and monitoring, but the system has the ability to watch everything 24/7, 365. Impossible for anybody to manually do this, but the machine learning that's embedded in our solution does that, and it creates a digital fingerprint for everybody, so it has baselining for the entire organization. And behind this is the predictive analytics, and it really is best-in-class technology. We're looking at areas such as accidental leak, opportunistic data theft, espionage, financial fraud, and even sabotage. Currently, our machine learning is unbeaten, including beating Microsoft's machine learning algorithms in head-to-head testing. We work with the CERT data set, and which is developed in conjunction with government, the U.S. government, and we actually add additional algorithms into that to further boost the machine learning that's doing the predictive analytics. One of the key things that we get out of that is not just an alert when, say, someone downloads a big file from the credit card server and they happen to be in customer support, and that's a very strange thing to happen. That would set off an immediate alert. But there are more subtle things, and you can't just wait for for someone that's very close to the moment of breach. You want to be looking at it in a more proactive way, and this is where our enterprise-wide risk scoring comes in. So with all of the data we're gathering from every person every day, our system is continually analyzing that and creating a risk score for everybody. And we indicate those people that are considered to be in the high risk category. So say in this company of 700 people or 7,000 people, these 6 people are in the highest risk category. So as a security engineer or analyst, you come in the morning, grab your coffee, pull up the top your risk score dashboard, and you see where you should start taking a peek in what's going on with these 6 people. Yellow indicates that they're on the edge. They're not quite red, but they're certainly high. People that are not reaching the threshold that's set for the risk, they're blue. So which is going to be the most people in the company, right? But we want to be able to take a look and see if what strange things are happening with these people that is causing them to move up into the red. And then you can delve in and see exactly what's going on with each of those people and why they were in the red, all the different factors that came into place with that. So as we talked about in the beginning, it's an integrated and intelligent platform. So we're continually watching with the endpoint monitoring. The machine learning and AI is analyzing everything. If it's an immediate problem, something like a huge download from the credit card server, that alert's going to go off. But we also have alerting, as we just saw with the dashboard. But then once that happens, we need to be able to figure out what's going on, whether it's from the risk score or that alert that just came down because Joe just downloaded 17,000 records out of the credit card server. So seeing is a really important part of this, not just trying to decipher it from network traffic. And remember, this is especially hard when people are remote. So what we have the ability to do is actually go back in time and take a look at exactly what's happening. So we have eyes on glass technology, and this is where the user activity monitoring piece comes into play in this integrated platform. So we call it a time capsule DVR. So if Joe downloaded those 17,000 credit card data points at 9:15 this morning, let's go back in time to 9:15 and then play back with screenshots everything that he was doing. You're literally going to see him go, moving the mouse and going on to ESPN and checking sports scores, starting the download. You watch the download. Now the question is, what is he doing with it? And this is the point of truth, right? Is he working on a big report that's unusual for the COO? Okay, great, he's doing something good. Or is he using obfuscation software and trying to import it into an Excel spreadsheet that he can then, upload to the cloud? Big problem. That's a big security risk. We're going to be, locking him down, knocking him off the network, getting security and management involved immediately. But the idea is that you're not waiting and trying to decipher things for for days or hours even, that you're figuring this out in minutes, because you can go back in time and see exactly what he's doing. And also have all the detailed logs that match up with that. And our clients use all of this data when they have to, unfortunately, go to court with these people that are stealing data. And it happens a lot more than anyone would like to think, unfortunately. But this is really valuable part of the evidence chain. So what we've been working with most of the companies over the last year is really empowering this new cybersecurity, this new workforce transformation, getting ready for the new normal, working beyond that office perimeter. We would love to give you a demo of either Cerebral or our smaller business version of our product, which is called Vision. I'm happy to give you a demo, talk with you about more details about it. So I think that's about it. Did you have any closing words, Christine?
I don't, but we do have a couple of questions that have come in that we can
fantastic.
We can go through. So one of the first ones is, does the Cerebral and Vision system monitor keystrokes and mouse clicks per hour, or how does that work?
It monitors both of those continuously. So it will capture all mouse clicks and all keystrokes. Now that is an option that you could turn off if you didn't want to be doing that, but yes, it has the capability of capturing all of that.
Awesome, thanks. Another question that came through is this mainly installed on company assets? What about people who are using their own systems, and does that require a consent agreement? So two-part question.
Yeah, excellent question, and especially as we said that 52% of the people are using personal devices. It's a lot different than it was a year ago. I would say that most of the systems that it's being used on are company systems, and generally companies will, when you give them a laptop, you're signing a consent that you're using this for work. And there should be a line. We're not lawyers, and you should definitely talk with your legal teams about this and the wording and so forth. But very often there's a line in there that says we have the ability or option to monitor our assets. So that's always a good rule of thumb, but you should work with your own legal counsel for that. When you're talking about monitor, and by the way, take a step in here. This can be deployed in either a visible mode or stealth mode. So many companies deploy this, and the employees don't know that it's there, which is really important with cybersecurity, right? You're trying to catch someone that's heading up a fraud ring. You don't broadcast that to those people. So that's always a consideration. But when you start talking about productivity and compliance, a lot of companies now are more upfront in telling their employees. That's an individual decision each company has to make on how you want to deploy it. If we're talking about personal devices, you're really going into a new area, and you need to think about a couple things. Our former CISO here at Veriato, who came from the NSA and was, he would always lecture that you should never have people with their personal devices going into your corporate network, because you don't know what their kids downloaded an hour ago on their personal PC. It's just such a huge security risk. So that's one point. But if they are, I think what we've heard some companies are doing is they're giving their employees the ability to work remotely, but with that there are some levels of constraint. And one of them is, look, if you're going to be using your own PC or even the company PC, and we're going to give you the ability to work remotely, in order to do that, if you're going to tie into the corporate network, we have to have the ability to monitor that PC, or you need to come in the office and work within the confines of within the firewall. So that's one of the caveats. Where the world's all in total transition right now, and it will be for probably the next months and maybe years. So as this transitions, in thinking about what the new workforce is going to look like and what tools and policies are going to manage that, those are some key things to think about. If you're going to give them that flexibility, great, but they have to realize that the system is going to be monitored. You may only monitor it, during the work hours between 9 and 5. Maybe the VPN capability, gets shut off at certain points, so they can't get in the network when you're not monitoring. So there's a number of different ways to take a look at it. But and again, you should definitely talk with your legal counsel about any of those issues. Excellent question, though.
Yeah, and thanks for that detailed answer. Another one that just came through is, how does monitoring affect employee privacy?
Yeah, good question. A couple things to think about. One is, as I mentioned earlier, is that you have fine-grained control over exactly who and what you're monitoring. So if there is concerns about certain groups or people, or just as a general company policy, like I said, you may only be monitoring just applications that are used. I don't care what websites people are going to, what they're doing on their. I only want to know, I'm watching when someone does not use work applications for at least 3 hours a day. Then I want to know. So you can narrow it down like that. The other thing to think about is that it's certainly not us. Once this is deployed, this is all deployed in your environment, not in our environment. So we don't see any of this. And generally, it's not any individual that's looking at it. It's the machine learning and the AI that's watching everything all the time. It's only when an alert goes off, or you're pulling maybe a productivity report, that you're seeing some of that detail. We actually have, from a security perspective, with companies that had privacy issues, they had set up a system, because there's kind of two parts to it. One is the monitoring, and then one is going in and seeing the detailed what's going on if you suspect a problem. One thing that companies have done is they've kind of put up a password protected kind of firewall, if you will, where a security analyst can look at the alerts and decide whether it's good or bad. But if it's a serious alert, they don't have the ability to go in and actually pull all the detail from any individual employees and what they're doing. That has to then get escalated, and sometimes there's even multiple sign-offs. So it's say a two-part security code that has to get put in before that information gets uploaded from that person's PC, and you're actually looking at his screenshots and what he's doing in the detail logs. And that may be the head of security and the head of HR or head of legal or the COO, however it is. But you can control who's actually seeing the detail. The key is that the AI and the machine learning are watching everything all the time and gathering all that data.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, that was definitely a great question and super timely. We actually have a webinar coming up in the future, kind of digging into that topic a lot more, because I feel like, right, as we continue to focus on security beyond the office perimeter and employee monitoring and things like that, that's a topic that is definitely top of mind. Just checking the questions here. I see one, it's a little bit long, but I'll try to maybe paraphrase and keep it brief. Is it possible to like monitor multiple devices for one user? Let's see. Yeah, we kind of expand on that.
It's a good question, because it actually is. We look at it from the user perspective as opposed to the device perspective. And that comes into play, especially with things like VMs. And I'll give you a perfect example where we work with some police agencies. So you may have, an officer who has his desk and he has his desktop sitting in the station house. But then when he goes into the squad car, it's an Android-based device that's monitored. So when he logs in, it knows that it's the same person. So it is user-based monitoring.
Awesome. Good. Okay, yeah, I don't see any other questions in here, so I'll keep an eye out in case any other ones come in. But in the meantime, any final thoughts that you want to add, or any closing remarks from you?
No, just we're looking forward to working with people. I mean, things are definitely shifting, and from a a head of technology or a head of IT security perspective, looking forward into what the new world's going to look like and having the tools in place to help you manage that, and whether it's from a productivity, compliance, or security perspective, It's pretty important that you're going to have visibility into this new world. It really will be different than what we have. And as we mentioned, there are things like, policies, new types of policies, what's allowed, what's not allowed. How do we really keep the data safe? That's the bottom line. And we're helping a lot of companies work through those kind of solutions and looking forward. So we're happy to do it with anyone here on the call. Love to give you a demo and go into it in a lot more detail with you for either our Cerebral or our Vision small business product. So looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I've seen a couple of other questions kind of trickle in that we'll probably need to just take offline. And so if you did submit a question, we'll be providing more information there. And so yeah, thanks so much for the demo, Pete. Thanks for sharing such a valuable perspective, and thanks to all of our attendees for spending the last hour with us. If you have any questions, like Pete mentioned, reach out to sales@veriato.com, questions, demo, anything that you need there, or feel free to call the number on the screen. And with that, we'll wrap up for today. Again, thanks for joining, and stay safe and secure out there.